Getting into fighting games requires a ton of investment, not just in the time it takes to learn how to play these games, but also financially. You need to buy things like a console or PC, a controller, monitors, and copies of the game. These things can add up pretty quickly. But what if there was an entry-level fighting game that could teach players the basics of the genre that could be played anywhere for free, even on the phone that you're probably watching this on right now? Enter Tough Love Arena, the free-to-play indie fighting game built entirely in a web browser. Created by M. Paul Weeks and Amy Shu, Tough Love Arena aims to be the beginner fighting game for everyone. I had a chance to sit down with the two to chat about the origins behind TLA and the story of its continued development.
The original pitch, the context is I've been making these little pet games, very modest things, Tetris, lots of recreating retro games. And I had my first idea for a sort of puzzle platformer that had like a music component where you would like do a very basic physics manipulation, and as you solve the puzzles, the music would grow. And it was way beyond my abilities, but I was trying to have fun with it and trying to figure it out. And then I go to an animation meetup and I see Amy's film, Meltdown, and I was super impressed with it. And a sort of theme during the Q&A was a lot of people talking about collaboration. There was this other pair that were talking about how they made a music video together, the sort of musician and the animator. Feeling sort of excited by that prospect, I approached her afterwards and said, hey, you wanna go to Starbucks and talk about something? And I showed her the prototype for my little music puzzler game. And she was like, that looks cool. Let's work on this together for fun. And I said, yeah. And then we forgot.
And then we had this conversation where I was like, hey, if you really want to make a video game, and you know, his passion is clearly with fighting games because he plays a lot of fighting games, he talks a lot about fighting games. I'm like, we can just make a fighting game. Like, we don't have to wait to have more experience. We can just make it now.
So at the time that I started, I felt that the beginner fighting game niche was relatively untapped. We had Fantasy Strike, Footsies was still in a very early state at that point. And I feel like the scene has expanded a lot since, but the way I play fighting games is I just find someone that wants to play a game and I play whatever game they want to play. And that's how I've played most of my games. So I'd go to an office, someone there plays Unial, I'll learn Unial. But I've moved around a lot, I've worked with a lot of different people. And sometimes I'd get to an office and I'd bring in my PS4 and my 2 fight sticks and no one would play fighting games there. And I'd be starting with, you know, the unmolded clay and trying to get someone in from scratch. And it's hard for someone's first game to be Unial or DBFZ or any of these other things that have, you know, 30-second long combos. And I tried some of the beginner games like Fantasy Strike or Smash or things that are, you know, a little bit more popular, a little bit more accessible as an on-ramp to get them interested. And that was what I thought could be a really successful angle for TLA and something that I had a lot of passion for. Because I really liked these beginner games, but I didn't totally agree with all their design decisions. So as I said, I started with like essentially footsies, just light punch and medium kick. And then as a player, I was like, well, where's my skip neutral button? And so I added a jump. And I was like, blocking seems kind of strong. So I added a throw. And I tried to add just enough to get to the fighting game that I would have fun playing, but still felt as simple and bare bones as possible.
And I feel like what you made in the first month, it was mostly just like making the engine work, right? Because he wasn't using Unity, he was basically remaking a lot of the stuff you will probably find in Unity, but in the browser. So I think a lot of it was just like, how to fix this work? How does like taking damage work? Stuff like that.
I would start with these preconceived notions of like, I'm gonna have a character whose fireball is kind of like Guile's, but then realize, well, oh, that's like kind of hard to balance without neutral jump. And the way that I constrained myself with the simplicity of the engine, a lot of existing archetypes didn't translate as well. And so I tried to focus more on just the matchup feeling of a fighting game where I am playing the rushdown character versus the zoner versus I am playing the rushdown character versus the grappler. And this feeling of just, I have a zone where I'm strong. I have a situation where I'm strong that's different from my opponent. And that's what's interesting. And it doesn't necessarily map one-to-one, but as long as I can create those moments, that's the tension that makes the game fun to play. And so I remember getting the feedback when we released in January of a lot of people were like, Noodle is insane because you have this Rekka character who's also Dhalsim and also has a DP. And this seemed almost heretical to combine all these archetypes. But I was actually really inspired by, again, I keep bringing up Eunice, which I haven't played that much. What blew my mind was Lynn. She's like one of the main characters and she's the super fast rush down, but she has like Guile's fireball. she just has this option to sort of like cheat neutral, which is supposed to be hard for a rushdown character. I think the game supports it because it has these really strong mobility options, but that I shouldn't be too precious about like translating existing archetypes and copying exactly what I know. Because one, that won't be as interesting if it's just simple Street Fighter. And two, as long as I preserve that matchup feeling, preserve the fact that each character has relative strengths and weaknesses, that's fun. And then again, going back to Amy, as long as it stays evocative, I think, to their flavor and their character, it rings as true. So yes, if you describe Noodle as Fei Long plus Dhalsim plus Ryu, that sounds messed up. But if you look at Noodle and you're like, well, the arms go far, and Frenzy makes sense because the arms are whipping around, they're really big, and Wreckers are fun, then you're like, okay, that makes sense, that's Noodle.
He basically taught me all the terminology. Like I learned so much just listening to him talk about it. But I want to say like we designed the characters around like their mechanical strength. We have like a character with long arms, long range, and then we have like a really buff, muscular character, and then we have like a quick little guy to round out the set.
I said, draw me characters that you want to draw. Give me, I don't want to give you any direction. I want this to be as fun and expressive for you as well. So what do you want to draw? And she came back with some concept art.
Designing them was interesting because I feel like I got to kind of do it in a vacuum. My thought process was, we're doing this for free, we're doing this for ourselves, for fun. And I love, like strong silhouettes, flat colors, a lot of animators into that. But also I really like the idea of expressing with just body language and no facial expressions. So that's sort of something I decided on really early is like they shouldn't have faces. And I think that makes them more relatable in a way. And I feel like they don't need faces because their body shapes are so different and their body languages are so full of personality. Like the way that each character gets up or gets hit or jumps is like all really different. And they all sort of showcases their personality, whether it's like being kind of awkward or being really buff, which is a personality, and just being kind of sly. That's sort of how I think of the three of them.
I think it really benefited us that you didn't have the context of like other fighting games in a way that could anchor you. Because this came up a lot in the first year when I was trying to design moves. And I'd basically be like, I want Guile's hopping medium kick. And I'd be trying to describe that and I'd just be like, let me just show you the sprites. And she would resist me being like, no, because then I'm just gonna draw that. And I want to draw my own version of that.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like when we're developing moves, he would just be like, well, the hitbox should be this far. And they should be generally be like this kind of pose. And I would just take that and run with it. I'll just be like, what's the goofiest thing I can do but still fit that criteria? In the beginning, their gimmicks was one person long arms, so they were called arms. And Beef was always called Beef, because ooh. And Onion was called legs, because they had long legs. So we had arms, legs, and we had Beef. And then their else was just gonna be like evil arms, evil beef, and evil legs. That's why they have the little backwards black heart. And then when they turn into like full-fledged characters, we're like, well, we need real names. And I think Paul came up with the idea of, well, Beef is great, we'll keep Beef. So let's just make the other characters also food names. That's how we got Noodle. And then we got Onion. And then the else who then became real characters just spun off the same idea of like what's similar to beef is pork. And that's how everybody got their names. And I think people love that. People had so much fun with that. Oh, someone posted a video where they like threw dried up like a pack of ramen like against a slab of meat on the ground, being like, this is the matchup. Yeah. Oh, people come up with really cool seats. Like someone made cheddar and Gouda. People make fun little duels of other food characters.
We definitely had a moment, because we came up with the character names before the game name. And we had a moment where we were trying to decide, should we lean into this? Should we call our game like Food Fight or something? But I figured that would be, again, we loved the designs and we loved the names because they felt evocative and they felt fun. But I figured if we called our game Food Fight, and then you show up and it's this, like Play-Doh looking guy and not, the living tomato, you'd be confused or disappointed. So instead we leaned into the heart theme. So sometimes people are a little confused of like, what's with the food sub theme, but
it's just fun. Yeah, it's goofy. We're just unapologetically having fun. Yeah.
Tough Love Arena's aesthetic is reminiscent of the older Flash game titles like Slime Volleyball or Cannonball that I would play in my high school computer lab instead of doing, any work. Along with its amazing sound design and original music by Josie Breckner and M. Guire, its design echoes those games as well, being developed to be fully playable in almost any web browser. Why did the team go this route, And just how difficult is it to make a fighting game that can be played anywhere?
Honestly, the way that I played a lot of fighting games growing up was in emulators in the school computer lab. Specifically, back then, a lot of these emulators didn't have NetPlay, and we would play on one keyboard. And that was the original idea for Tough Love Arena. Like, day one, I wasn't planning to have online. I was planning for it to be offline only, working on one keyboard, and you only had 2 attack buttons. All with the intention of very much, this is gonna be in a browser, this will be something you can pick up at work or pick up at the computer lab and just be like, hey, roll over to my desk real quick and we'll hammer out a few matches, like slime volleyball. And it was only after a couple of months of playtesting with my coworkers that I realized, well, if I'm enjoying the game and I wanna practice it, but I'm not at work right now or I'm not at school and my friends are not around, it'd be nice if I could play with other people. Okay, we have to add online. And then if we're adding online, we have to add rollback. Like, that's the only way to do it. But that definitely started as the core inspiration. Again, the immediacy and the accessibility of it, of I want this to be something that people can play as their first fighting game. I want to be able to pull this up in the office as a fighting game I'm trying to teach my friend to play fighting games, very much targeting, I guess, that sort of beginner market, although it's sort of, rapidly evolved from there. I think you really have to figure out as a game developer, what is your metric of success? What is your goal? And this was a game we were making for free, for fun, our first real game either of us were making. So we weren't planning to be the next Undertale. We weren't planning to make $1 million. We were planning to just make something that satisfied ourselves. And in my sense, if I want people to play my fighting game, what fighting games have I played? Some games interest me. Some games have an IP that I'm already attached to. But a lot of games I've played and that I've really loved were just because I had a scene for them. I make a friend, this is the game they play, I'll play your game. So how do I minimize that barrier to entry so that if you want to play with your friend, you want to invite them to play with you, how can I make that barrier to entry as low as possible? Number 1, free. Number 2, as many platforms as possible. Granted, if I make it in Unity and port it to like PS4, PS5, Xbox, Switch, all these things, that could have a very large reach. But I found the browser just so much more immediately accessible. And honestly, selfishly, it's in my wheelhouse. If I were to start making a new game in Unity, I'm starting from scratch. But I have 10 years of experience in the browser. Not with game dev per se, but I know its eccentricities. I know how to squeeze a little bit more performance out. I know how to scale things. I thought it was a natural fit of, okay, I have this expertise and I've made these little pet things and I've already known the powerful feeling of, hey, you want to see the weird music puzzle game I made? Just click this URL. With all those lessons and with all that confidence, I was like, let's do it in the browser. We're going to make it an accessible intro game. We're going to lower the barrier to entry as much as possible because if I want people to play the game, they need people to play with. And if you can just hop into the casual queue and find a match, that's really empowering. And I think that does a lot for the staying power of your game. All of that said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that all the aspiring game developers out there maybe watching this video try to make their game in a browser. The browser has a lot of drawbacks. It has a lot of constraints. It has a lot of benefits, but has a lot of constraints. A big one is timing and performance. The web is very much this constantly moving standard that is very powerful, but very stitched together. JavaScript, the language that runs in the browser, was famously written in like a week. And it has since been turned into a real language, but it started on pretty shaky ground. I remember getting really disheartened about a year into development, reading a news story about this RTS. They were trying to like make the first hybrid MOBA RTS. And they were also pitching, it's gonna be in the browser. And then after 2 years, they're like, we're moving it out of the browser because you don't have control over the mouse. We wanna have the mouse scroll at the edges and have the game window constrain the mouse. And the browser just doesn't give us permission to do that in a way a custom client would. And things like that keep propping up. There is a new technology called like off-screen canvas that would allow me to parallelize the game logic and the graphics. And I would love to implement that. But according to the current spec, if I write code for off-screen canvas, it'll work in Chrome and it will work in Firefox, but it won't work in Safari. And I have people playing on Macs. If you use literally any browser on an iPhone, under the hood, it's actually Safari. So suddenly, if I wrote the game that way, maybe it just wouldn't work on iPhones. It's beautiful because I can write one code base that works on all these devices, but I still kind of have to be cognizant of the flaws of every device now, and all the different platforms. And in some cases, I just sort of give up. And if I get a bunch of bug reports of I can't connect to my friend and I'm using Opera, I just say, please don't use Opera.
I think like the most relevant thing is it's the background art. We don't know what device they'll be playing on, so you have different aspect ratios, like if you're full screen on monitor, if you have like a resized window on monitor, if you're on your phone, if you're accidentally vertical on your phone. So like the background has like a top stripe that most of the time you probably don't see, but it's just there so that if you suddenly get like more square and less widescreen, you have like, oh, the HP bar moves up, whoa, there's more ceiling.
Yeah, we had to make a lot of decisions with the rendering to account the fact that you have a vastly different aspect ratio if you just have an additional toolbar in your browser. So there have definitely been little constraints there. I would say it's a big boon to Amy's art style that she chose for this game, that because the characters are relatively featureless and because the backgrounds have these sort of broad strokes, it scales to a small display really well in a way that, like, if you had really detailed, it might alias a little bit. And one other thing that I really love about the browser is it is super fast and trivial to update the game, which has been really incredibly useful in this open beta that we're having. Just 2 weeks ago, I pushed a change I was really excited about, and in the little margins, I accidentally gave Rice an infinite combo. Someone points it out to me, and I had the fix live in 10 minutes. And then everyone has the fix live, because every time you go to the URL, you get the latest version of the game. And so that's been really empowering for rapid iteration and also for the sharing aspect. You don't have to worry about the versions being out of date. It's definitely given us a lot of advantages that other games don't have.
Launching a project is stressful, especially for such a small team. What was the reception to Tough Love Arena's launch, and how did Paul and Amy handle the highs and lows that came with it?
It was surreal because, again, all of my previous games and gadgets and gizmos, I had an audience of like one. It was me. And I would show it to a couple of friends, and that was it. But all those projects, took max 2 months worth of weekends. And there hit a point about a year into development, mid-2020, a couple months into lockdown, where I started to get kind of intimidated by how much time we had sunk into this and how far I continued to see the roadmap extended forward of all the things that were still left to do that I wanted to do. And feeling like this is a really non-trivial investment. Like, I can have fun wasting a couple weekends making Pac-Man just to satisfy my curiosity. But I've sunk a lot of my life and a lot of Amy's life into this. And now there's some stakes. We've put in investment and I care now. And I really hoped in my heart of hearts, like, if we can just get a small community and it becomes a Discord fighter and just, it's something that people know to maybe teach their friend, and we have like 20 players online, that would be enough for me. That's such an order of magnitude larger than all my previous projects. That would be more than enough. And then we released in January. I DM'd a few people and we went shopping. I was like, okay, we pushed it, we made the official tweet, let's go buy groceries. And then we come back and we're like, oh, a couple people care. And then way too many people started caring.
Ooh, let's go, boys.
Yeah, I remember the day we launched, he had a little status monitor set up tracking sort of how many people are on the page right now through like Google Analytics or something. And I feel like we got super lucky because, like you said, he just sent out like DMs on Twitter. Like, we didn't put any money into real advertising. And when it sort of started skyrocketing, like the first few hours, there were like a dozen people checking it out in the States or something. But then it quickly became like in the hundreds from like all over the world. And it was really insane.
It was super exciting and super gratifying. And then Sharpie reaches out and wants to interview me. And then some writer reaches out and we get that article in Vice. And it feels like the world is our oyster. And then the hype dies down. And we're still getting, 200 active players in February. But there's not really any new tweets. There's not anyone new coming out of the woodwork to talk to me, to feature me in their YouTube content. And again, we didn't do any promotion or any effort. We got very lucky beyond just like those 6 tweets. But it continued to fall off. And I think our lowest point was definitely the summer through a combination of school being out, time, and also we were really busy and then I got sick. And I firmly believe that what kept people around to some degree was every time that there was a balance patch, every time that there was updates, that's essentially new content. It's another excuse if you're a dedicated player, if you've played seriously enough to like participate in a tournament. Back in like March and April, I was still changing characters pretty dramatically like every week. And so you would turn it back on to see what's new. There's new combos to do. There's new things to lab. That's exciting. But I didn't want that to become like our only source of community because it also makes the game incredibly unstable.
I want to say it's his baby, it's his brainchild. I put a very pretty coat of paint on it, and I very much care about this paint. But I know like it's his writing, right? Like the content are his ideas. And I remember that when the numbers start to dip, as they naturally would, he was really bummed out. Yeah. And I think it was great that we had each other because we would like take turns telling the other one, it's okay, the numbers don't matter. And
we take turns being sad.
And the next day we'll swap. And depending on who was like had a smart brain at the time.
It was hard. And we ultimately tried to remind ourselves that like, hey, take yourself back a year. 40 people right now is still really amazing. Amy has done animation for big projects, and some of her films have won awards and stuff. I think Amy's used to being a little bit of a celebrity. But you know, I've lived in obscurity until now, and 40 people want to play my game right now. 10 people are in my Twitch stream right now. That's really cool. And trying to focus on that and celebrate those wins. It would be a lot more stressful if I was relying on this for a living. And that is a massive privilege that I have and conceit of this project, which again makes it not super transferable as a roadmap to other indie fighting game developers, unfortunately, that I have the luck and the blessing to, you know, have built up these savings working a pretty, you know, good job for many years that can allow me to take half a year off, and follow my dream.
Since its release, the Tough Love Arena team have been very open about the ongoing development of the game. There's a Discord for fans to chat and provide feedback, and Paul hosts monthly State of the Game streams to talk about future updates and ideas that may come to TLA. As nice as that transparency may be for players in the game, however, it sometimes comes with a very human cost.
We've gotten a few nasty DMs.
It felt like really personal.
And that stuff hurts. But if you look at other fighting games, if we look at how patch notes are released, from a player perspective, transparency is always better. Players like transparency. To me, the only cost of transparency is it does take a little bit more time if you're documenting stuff, a little bit more of your time if you're making yourself available and explaining everything. And it's embarrassing. I think there's also a huge mindset among especially legacy fighting game developers, like the whole thing about not wanting to reveal frame data or reveal hitboxes, this feeling of, you know, this is how the sausage is made, as you said. This is the hidden stuff. This could maybe look a little weird. This could be embarrassing. It feels too private. But I know the player's gonna get it anyways. They're gonna get it. So why not just make that easy? Why not make it a conversation? Why not earn some goodwill? To me, again, it's trying to have empathy with my prospective player and be like, well, if I was trying to play TLA, wouldn't it be nice to have frame data in the game? Wouldn't it be nice to have hitbox display on day one? Because everyone's already making these tools for yourselves just for debugging. Like the tools are there. I look at the frame data all the time when I'm trying to like figure stuff out from a game design perspective. So why not just make it public and spend a day putting a nice coat of paint on it? We're not 100% available all the time. You can't expect us to respond to everything. Just because you ask nicely for it doesn't mean we'll do it, but we'll say, thank you for your feedback and we'll consider it, or we'll give an explanation of why. I think that has earned us a lot of goodwill and has helped build and keep the community that we have right now that is in the Discord talking and is showing up to the weekly tournaments. Because, hey, I mean, honestly, the tournaments with the highest numbers are the ones where I announce that I'm playing because everyone's excited to beat up the developer. Like, I think it really helps you as a developer to put yourself out there. But barriers are important. And some people can get a little familiar and some people can get a little harshly frank. And you have to tread a line between, you know, you don't want to become the dictator that only surrounds himself with yes men, because you'll never get any real feedback. And so I try to listen to people who have less positive things to say about the game. But we have no patience and no time for like trolls or people who are just trying to stir shit or, you know, tell edgy jokes or...
We had a couple of those.
Yeah. Also, big shout out to Amy. I try to make this clear in the About page, although I take credit for the game design and the programming, and I'm more so the face of things, and I do the development streams. Amy, of course, does the art direction and the character design, but I try to stress how many other loose ends she picks up, and one of them is
jack of all trades.
One of them is community moderation. I give a lot of credit to Amy for helping sculpt our Discord, which is our primary community, into the sane place that it is. Because when it got a little nasty at the beginning of the year, because we grew really fast and you'll get a couple nasty people, I definitely struggled with how to deal with that.
I love our Discord community. I love Discord in general. I'm on there all the time. And we have a very nice group of people on Discord.
Yeah, I am the out of touch grandpa on Discord. People are asking me to add roles, and I'm like, you have to talk to the parent.
Tough Love Arena has continued to evolve since its release, adding things such as mod support that allows players to remix characters and moves, and new controls like a dedicated throw button. What does the future hold for Tough Love Arena as it heads to its 1.0 release?
In my mind, and I try to make this public, I have a to-do list linked within the game. In my mind, I think I have like 3 big features left that I want to add that to me make it a complete game. To me, those features are single player content, some sort of, even if it's pretty bare bones, some sort of arcade mode, fully fledged mod support with the ability to upload custom assets and really create your own characters, and desktop release and potentially mobile release. Porting the game to native clients, for me, really serves the purpose of making it much more manageable for offline events. Being in a browser, you do need to have a online, constantly working internet connection, even if you're playing training mode, because it is dynamically loading the sprites as you need them to try and save on bandwidth. But that means if you take your laptop and put it on a table and try to run a local, and the Wi-Fi drops out at the same time that someone picks orange garlic for the first time in the tournament, it won't load the match. And that to me is a deal breaker. So if I want people to take it seriously as something that they could run side tournaments for, I need to have a sort of offline version that is a Windows executable, a Mac DMG, that kind of stuff.
Oh my god, there's so much polish. It's partly just me being perfectionist, but there's so many things I don't consider done. I don't consider the logo done. I think the logo needs more polish. It should have like a little sliver of shine, maybe some gradient. And also I drew everything with just like the sketchy default Photoshop brush that I use for every kind of sketching. I don't consider the final texture. I think everything needs to be redone. The only things done in the game are noodle and rice. Everything else is not done.
Why should people play Tough Love Arena? There's no barrier to entry. It's free. You can play it right now. Just type toughlovearena.com into the browser, toughlovearena.com, https://toughlovearena.com. It's super easy to share with your friends, to share replays with your friends, to get a lobby going, all that stuff. I think it's a really gentle on-ramp to getting you or your friends into 2D fighting games. Actually, a lot of our core community comes from platform fighters, comes from Smash and Rivals, where this was the first 2D fighter they could sort of grok and get into. And they're way better than me. They're beating me up at the weeklies. It's a nice casual game for you to pick up and play, even on your phone. But we do our best to have enough depth that if you are a veteran fighting game player, you won't be bored. There's some juice, there's some stuff to lab, there's some tight links, there's some wonky jungles, and there's a decent amount of character knowledge to accrue. So we try to make it easy to pick up and play, really fun, just play a couple games experience. But if you want to stick around, if you want to compete, there's some meat on these bones.
The characters are great. The characters are really fun. They all have their own gimmicks. They're very silly, they're very expressive. People love to make up backstories about them. I have some ideas for backstory that we can probably release in arcade mode like we talked about earlier, so look forward to that. And it's just a fun time.
I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has played and talked about the game thus far. We appreciate all of the feedback. Thank you to everyone who gave it a chance. Thank you to everyone for giving us a platform, essentially, because we're two people with no video game experience, no ties to the industry or anything, just trying our best. And if you stick around, I promise that we're still working on the game. We're still pushing multiple updates every week, and we'll be doing that for a while.
Thank you for watching our look at the making of Tough Love Arena, and thank you to our patrons for making projects like this a reality. If you like our documentaries and have the means to do so, consider supporting us over at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock. And an additional thanks to special contributor Fightstick, who wants to shout out the Ultrafine Atomic Weeklies, a free weekly KI tournament, as well as all the small TOs and players that support the games they love. Links for the Ultrafine Atomic Weekly and our Patreon are in the description below.